But, okay, so we got some answers about that fluctuating work week. You got it? Okay, so we can still go through these problems if you want to do that, because there are two, aside from the BELO plan, there are two other ways, and the difference with the BELO plan is, like for the fluctuating work week, it's kind of like, 42 hours one week and 38 hours another week. Like it's within a reasonable range. But with the BELO plan, it's like that range is larger. And also, as we had talked about, so the BELO plan offers some advantages both to the employer and the employee. The employee is getting guaranteed overtime, whether they work that overtime or not. And for the employer, they're making sure that they're in compliance, as well as it's easier from a record-keeping standpoint. But the two different ways so everybody saw my message that I sent out in the announcements about explaining why we use 0.5 instead of 1.5 when we're doing these calculations. So because the overtime is already, the flat extra time is already baked into the salary. So any extra time at just single time, regular time, over 40 hours a week is baked into that salary. But the 0.5 is not baked in. Yeah.
So it's when we do the 1.5
Yeah, and we would use the 1.5 when we're not using a fluctuating work week calculation. Like if we're just somebody who works regular hours, but then they work overtime, then we're going to use that 1.5. It's really, we're just going to use the 0.5 calculation when we're talking about one of these types of plans, right? We can use the 0.5 as well. Like I said, we can use the 0.5 when we're talking about individuals with standard work weeks. Or we can use the 1.5. The answer is going to be the same. But when we're talking about the calculation for fluctuating work weeks or the BELO plan, we have to use the 0.5 instead of the 1.5. And that's just, like I said, because the 1 of the 1.5 is already baked into the annual salary for overtime purposes. So per the Department of Labor and following FLSA guidelines on this, we just use the overtime premium approach. So there are a couple different ways of doing the calculation. And again, you are going to come out with different results in each of these ways, but and whether you use one over the other would be determined in an agreement between the employer and the employee. As long as the employee is fully understanding why how that calculation is done, then the employer can choose to use either one of these methods. But there just has to be a clear understanding. So in that first method, and this is the, is this the one that works? Not really. This one. Not really. Neither one of them. Hold on a second. I think I might have one in my bag. Hopefully. Somewhere. Well, I did at one point. Nope. All right, well, one more pocket I can look in. All right, we'll just make do. We'll use the blue. Okay, so in this first one, which is the one we went through in class, in order to determine how much is being paid, we've got to figure out what the hourly rate is. And then once we determine that hourly rate, we're going to multiply that by 0.5, and then that's the additional amount that the employee is going to be paid. So they've got their standard weekly salary, and then any overtime once we calculate what that hourly rate is just added to that weekly salary. The two different ways of doing it is determining what that hourly rate is. In the first method, we would divide it by the total number of hours worked. So like in this example here, they make $35,000 a year. They worked 45 hours. In this first example, in order to calculate the hourly rate, we would divide the weekly salary by the total number of hours that they worked. So in this case, 45, which means that this rate would change probably every week. If they worked 45 hours this week, 47 hours next week, we would then divide it by 47 in the next week. Does that make sense? So it's divided by the total number of hours worked in the first scenario, which, like I said, means that hourly rate is going to vary every week. In the second scenario, the only difference in the calculation is we're now dividing, to determine the hourly rate, we're now dividing it by 40 hours. Instead of the total hours actually worked, we're dividing it by just a flat 40 hours. Okay? So in this case, that hourly rate is going to remain constant. And so the overtime that's being paid is going to remain constant. In the first scenario, the overtime that is paid is going to vary every week depending upon how many hours were worked. Questions about that? Okay, so that's really the only difference between these two methods, okay? The difference with the BELO plan is we're going to have a standard salary that assumes all of that overtime. It's already baked in to the salary as well, but they're going to get paid then 1.5 times their regular rate in the BELO plan.
What does BELO stand for?
Oh, it's benefit. This isn't what it really stands for. Bonafide executive, administrative, or professional plan. So bonafide executive, I don't know where the L comes from. Per BE, what does BELO stand for? Let's see if we can actually get a proper definition of that acronym. Oh, no, not that. Human resources, BELO plans. And maybe it's not. See, they've got it. They have it. They don't have it capitalized. Like it's not an acronym. It is weird because it doesn't. But so bonafide executive, administrative, or professional plan. Bonafide executive plan. So again, it's guaranteed weekly pay, even if they work less than, so they're already getting paid for the overtime. But then anything over what the agreement is, they're going to get paid time and a half for. Okay. So there are those 3 plans. We'll look at there's a homework problem that you guys have that involves a BELO plan. So we'll take a look at that to kind of go through that example. It's going to be, my example is going to be slightly different from the homework problem that you have, but it's going to follow the same pattern. Okay? Questions about these? Hopefully that kind of helps to clarify why we're using the 0.5 as opposed to the 1.5. It's a little weird. It feels like they're not getting paid the 1 and they're just getting paid the 0.5, but they are getting paid the 1. It's built into the salary. Any questions? Nope. All right, so we got that done and out of the way and ahead of time. All right, so I have this quiz and some sample problems. And this is just to kind of review what we talked about in the class. I've got these, we don't need to record for this.